After a short but humid stretch of weather, most people watch for dehydration or heat stroke, but research points to another concern for people living with mental illness. Miriam Niesmeyer is here to break down how the effects of extreme heat can reach beyond the physical body. Miriam.
Daniel, research suggests higher temperatures and longer sunlight exposure may trigger bipolar disorder relapses that require a trip to the hospital. I talked with two therapists about how the hot summer days may affect mood and behavior for people experiencing mental illness.
There's so many ways that heat, I would say, negatively can affect mental health.
Northern Illinois sweated through the third heat wave of the summer season, a threat most people connect with dehydration or heat stroke.
Heat can affect, chemical levels in the brain. Heat can also, affect sleep levels. And as everyone knows, lack of sleep or sleep disruption can really affect mood.
One study finds higher temperatures may trigger bipolar disorder relapses, requiring hospital care, while greater sunlight exposure may raise the risk of manic episodes.
I think any sort of stress, cortisol level increases, any sort of stress hormone increases are going to increase the risk of existing mental health issues getting worse.
Four Corners Wellness Center founder and psychotherapist Kevin Polke says dehydration and humidity of heat can create sensations that feel panicky.
I think that can also, maybe increase an awareness that, I have to do those extra things to make sure that I'm, going to cooling stations, making sure that I am not out in excessive heat or making sure that I'm hydrating.
Lighthouse Counseling owner and psychologist Jason Soriano points to extreme irritability, anger increases, and sleep reductions as warning signs of a manic episode.
Bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anything where any kind of biochemical change can really affect the condition. And you can see where heat could be a contributor or the tipping point.
Both therapists say it's important to give your body a break in extreme heat and to hydrate well before going outside.
Well, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention warns some psychiatric medications can react differently in the heat.